today's topic is really, AI in the human ecosystem, AI in real life. And at this time in history, it's really important for us to understand not just the power and potential of AI, but the peril of AI as well. And how are we going to navigate that? So what we'd like to focus on today, and it complements that terrific talk, the terrific talks we've heard this morning, is how AI impacts individuals and society. How does it perturb our economy? How does it change our legal system? How does it impact our culture? How does it perturb our connections with each other? So let's just start with a term we use all the time, responsible AI. And I want to ask each of the panelists, what does responsible AI actually mean? Who are we responsible to? What does it mean to be responsible for AI? How do we know if AI is responsible or not? So I'm going to start with you, Martha.
It's a pleasure to be here. I've already learned so very much. I want to even start by asking who's the we? When you say to whom is AI responsible, to who are we? And part of the challenge, I do believe, in the next phases of this really transformative set of human discoveries is to make sure that at every single stage, whether it is in the stage of identifying the data sets that are used for training purposes or the purposes for which any particular learning algorithm or generative AI is being used, that we talk about, and who's the we, that there's a lot of attention to participation, inclusion, who's excluded, diversity, access to the resources, even to participate in the discussions, access to compute, all of those features, so the distributional aspects. I do think that the consequences of this transformation, we talked about the printing press a little bit earlier today, we can't even foretell. But we already know that just limit ourselves to the discussion of social media, the impact of social media on social mores, how people talk to each other, the degree to which people actually engage in any well-settled norms of decency, the degree to which people trust what they're reading. All of those were not anticipated in the design and deployment of social media.
Go on, Michael.
I think it's important to start with the realization we have no clue what we're talking about when we say the word AI. So first of all, I've been working in the field for 40 years and developed some of the variational machinery behind some of the algorithms you've seen. And I never used the phrase AI in my whole career once. I was just a statistician, a computational statistician. So really, these algorithms are just gradient-based algorithms at very, very large scale. They were really hatched, I would say, around 2000 in companies in the back end. So doing logistics, say a company like Alibaba or Amazon, these are the most amazing stochastic control systems ever created by human beings. They take 1 billion products and serve it to hundreds of millions of people within one day. Inconceivable in any previous era. That could never be done by a team of people. So that was all done with the random forests, which were the neural nets of the day, gradient-based algorithms with large numbers of parameters and obscure black boxes. And they realized at Amazon they couldn't do this on one machine. They had so much data, because there's all this logistics data of ships moving around the ocean and strikes in China, and every one of those billion products had to be put together from other pieces, hugely complex. So they built a cloud. That's the origins of the cloud, was to run random forests for logistics. I found that fascinating. I went there around 2000, looked into it a little bit, learned about it. It was working. It created this logistics chain, which became this company, which served all of us throughout the pandemic and forever. And then it's been copied in many other companies. And it was amazing because it was creating brand new creative solutions to logistics problems that you'd never seen in the textbooks. It was exciting to the people working on it. It was a bunch of nerds behind the scenes, right? Then the data sources just transformed a little bit. It wasn't just logistics, it was purchases. That became recommendation systems. So now people are coming into play, right? Now the data has changed yet again. Now it's human speech and language and vision, so it seems artificially human. It's not. It's the same technology that creates new solutions to problems, but it's a problem-solving methodology. Okay, it's with humans in the loop at vast planetary scale. It's not some meta-intelligence which is brought in, plopped in, and solves problems for us. Okay, so that has, so responsible, there's many, many words here, but one of them is the damn thing should just work. The logistics chain should not break down. Supply chain should work around the world, even if there's a pandemic. That's responsible. If you don't do it right, it doesn't work. It hurts lots of people. So that's part of it. It's just engineering, folks. It's not this super intelligence which has arrived in the last year or 2 or 5. We have this new technology. It's not that complicated. It's gradient descent on bags of parameters with vast amounts of data. So the consequences are vast. We just got to reset our thinking here. It's like any engineering field. It takes 20, 30 years to sort of slowly develop, like chemical engineering, electrical engineering, and the humans start to get involved. We all get involved. We roll up our sleeves. We think about it. We talk. And so all of the chest beating that you're seeing right now and pearl clutching is a little bit harmful for the dialogue. We're not going to do that here, but I just think for the audience it's important to set terminology a little bit and realization of what's kind of happening.
Thanks. Well, we are going to go in order. Okay. Sabina, what about responsible AI?
Well, I think actually that follows very, very nicely, because I think it's very, very true that we need to focus on what are these solutions for, what are these solutions for whom. But I think also a consequence of the history of the evolution of AI, exactly in the ways you were describing, is the fact that we are thinking about responsible AI as a way of thinking about solutions. How do we make sure that those solutions are accessible? How do we make sure that those solutions can be usable to people that may, in fact, need them? And I actually think this is a very important component of responsible AI, but it's by no means the primary one. The primary one is who sets the problems that these algorithms are solutions for. So the problem, I think, is not so much access and usability. These are very important. I'm not trying to undermine the importance of this, but I think the biggest problem is design at the moment. Who is actually involved in designing these systems, very much in agreement with the idea of participation here, who is not just involved in regulating the system, but really governing what ingredients go into this, both at the technical level, how do we actually calibrate the models, what kind of empirical parameters we're using, but also at a much broader level of thinking indeed, what are the problems that we need solutions to? And that, I think, is where we are really missing the mark in a lot of the AI applications at the moment, partly because of the way this work is actually distributed and powered through society, who is actually now producing a lot of the algorithms that we are using. This is typically not done in a participative format, and there's been a lot of discussions, also very high levels of transnational collaboration around how do we actually try and engender more participation in constructing the algorithms. This is extremely difficult to do, and it does require a real rethink about for whom are we responsible and what the responsibility actually consists of. I'll leave it here for now.
Thank you so much. Responding to Fran's prompt, there are many different dimensions or many different aspects of responsibility in AI, and we need to map those out pretty carefully. It goes back to the alignment problem, in which you're concerned about whether or not your AI aligns with human values. And that's hard because human beings don't align with each other's values. So one strategy is to begin to try and come up with measures of alignment between people and between AI systems. Sort of the second part of your prompt, Fran, if you want to think about how we get to responsible AI, the starting point might be Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, but there are subtle perils in that I don't want to unpack now. Thank you.
I love that you brought up Asimov in the first 15 minutes of this. It's like amazing. Responsibility and trust are terms that we often use together. And I will say that for me, one of the biggest untapped challenges, if not the biggest untapped challenges around AI is trust. What do we trust? Did the Pope really wear a puffer coat? Did Drake in The Weeknd really release that thing on TikTok? Was it really them? It's hard to manage something that you don't trust, and especially in all the times that we want AI to make decisions where a bad result would be catastrophic. So, and I'm going to throw this out at whoever wants to jump in first. Doesn't have to be all of you. It can be all of you. I don't care. But what do we need to do to create AI that we can trust, at least as much. And let me just point out that we don't trust every human being, but we have some sort of context in which to kind of calibrate how trustworthy a response we get from a human being. How are we going to do this in AI land?
First thing you have to realize is there's no uncertainty in the current large language models. If you say, ChatGPT, you just told me something, how sure are you of that? It will make something up. It makes stuff up about all kinds of things, about facts and all that. But it's even worse here. It'll say, well, I'm very sure, or I'm not sure. And all it's doing is it's somewhere back in the training data, a similar question was asked, and some human said, I'm sure or not sure. But the human was thinking, like all of us think, about managing your uncertainty. And it's not doing that at all. Right? So that's scary. How can you trust something that doesn't have any idea of how unsure or sure it is? It doesn't even do the bootstrap if you're a statistician. You know, the minimal amount of resampling, it doesn't do that. Okay? It just takes data and pops it in, and a black box runs and gives an output. Right? Now, humans are pretty good with uncertainty. We all our days are full of uncertainty, and we manage it pretty well. But critically, it's not an individual human, which is so great with uncertainty. It's the collective. Okay, we manage uncertainty because we're in a collective, and I can look at someone else, I can learn from them, we can interact with our uncertainty. I'm not sure, how are you sure you? Let's get some more data because we're both not sure, and we think about it in this collective way. And the current systems are, because they can't talk the language of uncertainty, it's shocking, you know, but it really is true. Can't interact with us and can't integrate themselves with us other than by making things up and lying or sometimes wowing us. But how could you trust such a system if you can't say how unsure you are? Okay, so it's not like it's an unsolvable problem. It's going to take 20 years. It's going to take a while. We have ideas about how to do it. Even like AlphaFold, it actually gives out wrong outputs to lots of the questions on the edge of knowledge. Okay, it looks like this wonderful generative system can generate all these great things. Yes, we have a paper in Science recently that looked at doing this and lots of questions that scientists really ask, not about the old data, but about new things. And it gave out error bars which are completely wrong. Okay? How can you trust such a system? Well, you get better error bars. You fix the error bars. You make sure they cover the truth and they do the things that you've always asked in science. Okay, so we're in this progress. It's going to take 20, 30 years, but you just don't develop trust by kind of wishing it into existence. You've got to be an engineer. You've got to think about how to develop systems that are trustable. And then you got to realize that humans trust for various kinds of reasons. We all go into markets. We go into the city of Boston. We go into interactions that we trust it's going to be okay for us. It usually is. That's because we've developed all kinds of social science and individual social science skills that we all have about interacting with other people in complicated environments, including markets. Again, AI is not talking that language. It's going to have to eventually.
Martha.
I actually think this is fundamentally the most important question, because if we don't get it right, and it will take time, there may be a loss of trust in the enterprise and any of the enterprises that are being used, that are using anything that we call AI. So I spent much of this year actually with a group of scientists producing what's now out in PNAS, a short proposal for dealing with integrity in science itself. So when scientists use learning algorithms, supervised or not, there are three fundamental areas of verifying science that are in jeopardy. One is access to data, because it's mostly proprietary in the hands of a few companies. Second is replicability. We all know if it's generative AI, you can't replicate your own result. And the third is peer review, and I'll just say a word about that. There's a wonderful book by Jonathan Rauch called The Constitution of Knowledge that takes the issue of trust across different social systems. So whether it's news, law, my field, banking, and in each of these, very much as Professor Dick said earlier today, she said it's intelligence is a collective enterprise, trust is a collective enterprise. In each of these areas, there's something that looks like peer review. There's communities that constitute standards, measures of error, language, and then systems to check and to check. And that confidence in that is absolutely in jeopardy right now. At least it is in science. So all that we did is produce a statement that says developers of models and scientists who use the models need to be explicit about what they're asking, what they're using, what they don't know, for what purposes, and right now none of that is happening.
I think maybe another thing to think about is how tightly the notion of trust is actually coupled with the notion of expertise. Like we trust something because we think that there are reasons to trust, because we've cultivated that trust in a variety of different ways. And that very often takes the form of expertise, but then the question becomes, what are the boundaries for expertise? Right? And I think whether we're looking at scientific research or much wider uses of AI, there is a real need to recognize the boundlessness of certain forms of expertise. The fact that there is not just going to be the engineer or the politician or the person who specializes in ethics who's going to be able to provide grounds for trusting particular technologies, particular uses of technology, but it's typically a collection of different perspectives that brings together the kind of expertise you need to confront particular uses of technologies in particular fields. And that's the kind of participative element that I think we are missing. And I think very often that's the kind of thing people are very uneasy about when saying we don't trust this piece of technology, we're not quite understanding how it's designed, we're not understanding who was involved in designing it. It's another way to say we don't quite recognize our expertise, our understanding of this particular field and how this can be, how this decision-making process is being applied in my domain. I don't see that reflected. I don't understand how this is actually proposed. So at least thinking about expertise in a way that expands that domain to kind of multiple contributions and brings it to bear on issues of trust, I think is very important here.
Interestingly, I think all three of you are talking about the fact that trust has a lot to do with context. Michael was talking about error bars. If the error bars are small, or if I don't believe that there is going to be much error, then I have more trust in it. You were talking about expertise. If there's more expertise, Martha, in some sense, was talking about transparency. If we know a lot about where things came from and what they do, you have more trust. And a lot of times we're working with AI in the wild, and it just comes up with something. I've used ChatGPT from time to time, and I'd say, where do you get your citations? And this is a pretty hysterical exercise. Where did you get the citations for the first things that you do? And it's kind of random. So, does that make me trust it more? No. David.
Thank you. I think the immediate peril from generative AI is the ability to easily create deep fakes, misinformation, identity theft, and cybercrime. And the silver lining to all of this is that if everybody becomes convinced that deep fakes are very, very easy to manufacture, then perhaps we'll all become a lot more conscientious about curating our information sources. And I think that's a net social positive.
So in some sense, if you talk about society is made up of a lot of different publics, a lot of different public interests, and a lot of different cultures. So one of the things that I think, Sabina, you work on, and Martha works on as well, and mentioned, is what about the cultural disparities of the use of AI? So Sabina, talk a little bit about what our challenges are and how we might address them in terms of AI disadvantaging some cultural groups and not others.
Absolutely, thank you. So I think there's a sense in which, as indeed Stephanie, Professor Dix was reminding us this morning, there's a way in which we can understand the AI systems as basically a political system, is a decision-making system that, in fact, in many ways, we would like to reflect, I would think, at least in this room, a democratic system with some elements of representation from different parts of society. This is important not just because of ethics or because it's a political preference, but it's important for the reliability and the quality of that system, the extent to which we can actually rely on it and trust it. So in situations, for instance, as in one of the cases I'm working on, which is the use of AI in agriculture and for the production of agricultural knowledge and agricultural research, one of the things that very often happens is that there may be processes of consultation around collecting data, for instance, on the choice of different crop varieties from around the world that may fit different kinds of environments, particularly under climate change conditions. And there may be a lot of involvement of different local populations in actually collecting that data. But as the data get elaborated, enriched, structured, and then adopted for training of particular AI systems, maybe only some of that data is considered to be of high enough quality, or in fact just conforming to the standards set by the algorithms that they can actually be utilized. Very often when it comes to crop research, these are genetic data, kind of sequencing data of different types, maybe metabolomics, like basically omics data. And it starts to exclude, say, local knowledge, knowledge from local breeders, knowledge of people who actually are delving in local markets and are understanding of the relationship between the choice of particular crop varieties, the ways they will be used in that particular market, and the ways which, for instance, the food will be cooked. Right? So all of these forms of knowledge tend, in the kind of filtering processes we're seeing now used in AI in that domain, to be basically filtered out of the ways in which the information gets assimilated and used for training the algorithm. Obviously, what that means is that in practice, you're creating a decision-making system around, say, which varieties to use to feed the world in the next 50 years, which excludes 99% of the people who actually have expertise in that domain. So I don't mean everybody who's a consumer of food, but I mean very specifically everybody who has a stake in informing in ways that are relevant and important choices around which varieties we use in which environment, for which purposes, and for which types of consumption. Now, I think this is exactly an example of the confluing of these different problems in trying to set up AI systems so that they're more responsive to this kind of democratic but also expert participation in the building of the systems.
I have a bit of a cultural follow-up from Martha. When you talk about cultural groups and disparities, that also brings you to the discussion of fairness and equity. And you and Cynthia have been teaching this course on fairness and privacy. And so will law save us here? Will math save us? Will anything save us?
There is no magic wand and there's no savior. It's just all of us. It's just people. I will take the example of fairness and unfairness in the legal system. In the United States, there are just such massive inequalities about just about everything. But just let's focus on the access to justice, the legal system, access to court, and even a subset of that. Right now, about 80 to 90% of cases coming to state court have at least one party that doesn't have a lawyer. One reason I'm so interested in this whole field is that this could be the solution. You could actually have, a fifth grade education, but be able to give your prompts to a generative AI to be able to answer the notice that you have to leave your apartment and not be evicted. This could be fantastic. We will never provide enough lawyers for the people that don't have it, but this could be a tool. However, last year, about $1 million was spent on the development of tools in this area for people who don't have the resources. And about $4 billion was spent on the other side, billion. Right now, the biggest user of generative AI tools are large corporations. And the state courts are now flooded with cases that are generated by generative AI by creditors, not by debtors. And just to leave the courts for the moment and go to the way that the federal government creates regulations, notice and comment on regulations. Democracy, notice and comment, regulation proposals put out there. It used to be that even the people that you were describing could participate if they knew about it and say, here's what this regulation will leave out and here's how it'll hurt. Right now, the notice and comments are being flooded by generative AI produced. Before it was robocalls, but now it can't even be distinguished. Are these real? Are they not real? And you have these bureaucrats, the civil servants, who don't have the time to get through. They need algorithms to go through all the comments. But it absolutely pushes out voices that were already suppressed before.
David, did you want to?
I was up my top shell, but go ahead, Mike.
Wikipedia. I want to think about that one for a minute. humans have created these magnificent artifacts like Wikipedia, a lot of knowledge there, a lot of human effort went into it. It's all being ingested inside of the big LLMs, and now it becomes a black box. And you've lost who created it. You've lost the creator-producer relationship that has defined human history. That to me is as much a danger. I agree with the other danger is that we don't know what truth is, but that to me is just as much of a danger. It's not a given that it has to be this way, and it's just our current business model, which is that it all has to be free. We go out and we get it free, and we don't pay anything, we being consumers. And there's these big corporations out in Silicon Valley that make all the money, and we're happy with that. They build the huge vats of, the energy systems that are going to power all of this, and just the whole dialogue is completely weird. Now I notice whenever I'm in the room talking about these things, there's a lot of computer scientists, there's some law people, there's some social scientists and all. There's almost never an economist. Economists have been talking for 1,000 years how to create markets, how to connect people. Now there's probably exceptions. Are there any economists in the room? Just to see. Yeah, there's two, three. I mean, come on. It's just to be. They talked for all of my lifetime and for many lifetimes before that about how to create successful markets. Let me just give an example. Music is one that I have a passion for. You're going to hear me tomorrow night if you come to the show, or tonight. Young musicians aren't making any money. There's no market. They put their stuff out there. It gets pulled by the corporations, just like Wikipedia gets pulled by LLMs. And it gets streamed, and then someone else makes money. It's completely broken. You don't make money. You don't have a job as a young musician. All right? I've been involved in a company called United Masters. It's a huge success. It's been up for 5 years now. It's got 3 million musicians. And it's a multi-way market. It's not just producers, consumers. It also has brands. They all look at each other. The brands see that this person's popular in this demographic. They then hire the musician to write some more songs and engage with them. It's up and working. There's hundreds of thousands of now salaries for young musicians coming out of this. It's a lot of it. To me, this is an AI system. It's an overall intelligent collective system that empowers young people to bring their culture to the market. They get paid for what they do. And the whole thing of the AI here is just the connectivity. It gets access from one human to other humans that might value their work. And then the value is that actual money starts to flow. That's so different from the Silicon Valley mentality. But it didn't have to be. It really doesn't have to be. Okay, and so I love the law coming in and helping with a lot of this, but the law is a very impoverished tool. The copyright law is not enough. It's not going to fight off. The New York Times is going to have a case against OpenAI for ingesting all their stuff. They're going to lose because the law is not strong enough. We need a whole new infrastructure of provenance. Where did that come from? Track it. That's what the banking industry did to make a bank successful. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. That's why the medical industry does. We need to have that too. We need to envisage a whole new infrastructure of where did things come from? How do you get credit to flow back? Because then people will start to pay because they're involved in an overall market. This thinking is simple. It's just like Econ 101. But unless you start to bring people that think that way into the room, you're just going to have people building systems and people criticizing. People building yet more big systems, people making more vociferous criticism and asking for a regulation to solve us. We're in a very bad way in our dialogue right now. So there's no silver bullet. Econ people, they have their problems too. But it's got to be at least a sort of tripart dialogue that brings the whole market collective. You've heard several of us say the word collective from our different points of view, and I think it's important. I've heard much more about that than I've heard about algorithms and this and shiny machines and all that. And I think that that's not percolated enough into the national dialogue at all, and even in the academic dialogue.
I'm going to ask David a question, and then I want you all to think about if you have any questions, because we'll open it up to the audience. So I want to think about AI in the wild. I want to start with David, and I want to think about applications. So what are your favorite and perhaps least favorite applications of AI? Where do you think AI could really make a difference? And David, I really want you to talk about self-driving cars.
Okay. Certainly self-driving cars strike me as one of the potentially huge benefits from AI systems. Obviously, an autonomous vehicle is not exactly generative AI in the way we've been talking, but it has enormous things. According to the EPA, about 42% of human-produced greenhouse gases in the United States comes from the transportation sector. And electric networked AVs offer the potential for huge reductions in those greenhouse gas emissions. Presumably, if all the cars are networked and everybody is safe, then you can build car bodies out of canvas rather than having to carry 1.5 tons of steel around to protect you from other people. Similarly, if you have such networked AVs, you don't need to brake. Braking costs an enormous amount of fuel, and they can interleave through the stoplights and intersections without braking. In terms of the impact on lots of other aspects of society, the reason elderly people move into assisted living facilities is that they can no longer drive to the grocery store. AVs would solve that. There are a whole batch of other things that are coming up there, and I'm not saying that AVs are going to be an answer to everything, but they're one of the few technologies on the horizon that has the potential to make a meaningful impact on climate change. And so that's something that I think we need to follow up on.
So David, let me just push back a little bit. There was a recent study from some folks at MIT talking about the amount of energy it will take to run the autonomous computation in self-driving cars. So if they're ubiquitous on the road and we don't need stop signs, because they don't read stop signs, they just hear these invisible signals about the algorithms and platooning and all of that. But what about all the energy they're going to be taking up?
Well, this is an engineering problem, and there are various ways around it. Battery technology has made huge advances. We're now moving into chlorine batteries, which is astonishing. I see, well, it's an open question, but we have to explore it. I mean, we would be remiss not to try and work with safer, more efficient AVs. I'll jump back a little bit and also talk about some of the other things that these AI systems can do. One thing, we were talking about disparities a moment ago. AIs have, I think, on average, raised the playing field for everybody. It is now possible for everybody in the world to write at the level of a college sophomore, and that used not to be the case. Some of the most brilliant minds in my field don't speak English as a first language, and that has been a handicap to many, many people's careers. AI doesn't solve that entirely, but it's tremendously reduced the burden. I'm an occasional editor. I received a paper a year ago in which the math looked right, but the English was so poor that I could not even send it out for review. I wrote back to the author and said, please work with a native English speaker to fix this. I got the paper back the next day in perfect English. He'd run it through GPT-4.
Yeah. Sabina, what's your favorite AI application these days?
I think for me, it's probably like two examples I would take is one is diagnostics and the other is language translation. And I think they both have amazing advantages. I mean, we're all aware of the fact that we are seeing medical diagnostics progressing at an incredible speed at the moment, and this opens up all sorts of amazing options in terms of actually providing, like what, at least in Europe, we would think about national health services for everybody at a lower cost. We're also seeing applications in the diagnostics of the environment and problems in the environment, so detection of pollutants, for instance, in precision toxicology. And of course, in terms of literacy and translation, the fact that we can actually start to have intercultural, interlanguage dialogue in a way that's strongly facilitated by AI, I think is absolutely fantastic. At the very same time, all of those advantages are also good examples of the incredibly expansive gulf that is opening up between people who actually can take advantage of this technology and people who can't. In terms of language, which languages are actually being curated for automated translation? Very, very few compared to the richness of languages in the world. And of course, the few that are being curated are, lo and behold, corresponding to basically the richer sectors of society and the richer countries. Similarly, for medical diagnostics, for instance, we're seeing so much emphasis, so much investment on being able, basically on AI that's trained for very expensive to produce type of data, so MRI scans, for instance, these kinds of things, and much less investment on data that may be much more easily procured at any GP across the world, and then actually measured against much more kind of safer standards. So what we're seeing there is a situation where to use, for instance, medical diagnostics well, you need to complement them with human expertise and actual interpretation by doctors who will be able to match those results to the personal histories of the patient and actually make sure that there's no totally decontextualized kind of interpretations of the results in a way that can be damaging. and can do it in relation to, in a sense, low-cost environments. And this is a very, very difficult thing to achieve at the moment. But the premise is all there. The question is where the investment is actually going to go.
Michael, we may have heard of yours. Do you have anything to add? Okay. Martha, what's your favorite AI?
Well, I'm most hopeful, actually, about, besides medical applications, education. So the disparities in education, I know this country best, but it's true, of course, around the world, are tragic. Because every child is born with the capacity to become, fully educated and contribute back to society. And right now, the Khan Academy, which already has been a breakthrough in making accessible instruction for all kinds of people, has developed what's called Khan Amigos, which are AI-powered, personalized tutors, free for any person. And that's a breakthrough. So it doesn't matter if you live in a poor school district that's funded on real estate taxes, because the United States is bizarre that that's what we do, because you can have access to this if you go to your local library, and maybe even it will be distributed more broadly into people's homes. Relatedly, I can say that the partnership between Sesame Street and the International Rescue Committee to develop for the first time educational programs for people 3 years and younger who are refugees during the pandemic had to pivot to digital instruction. And lo and behold, every one of the refugees had access to a smartphone. They didn't have one, but they had access. And as a result, they were able to deliver materials to the 3-year-olds and their parents, and they catapulted in 10 weeks a year's worth of instruction. And because of this breakthrough, it's now possible to deliver this kind of service for refugees who are on the move, who are not in a location. So it's transformative.
Wow. Let me make sure that you all can ask some questions.
Great panel, thank you. So as I listen to this, I think things mostly divide into 2 categories. So one is, can we make these algorithmic systems, to use a neutral term, Michael, can we make them do what we want them to do? All right, and we have hallucinations, and the references aren't very good today, and they can't tell us whether they're making the right decisions or not. They are not trustworthy in the sense that we don't even know if they will do what we ask them to do. So that's a technical issue, and many of us are probably optimistic we'll grind away at this and make this better and better and better over time. The second issue, I think, that comes up in what we talk about when we talk about equity, or we talk about privacy, or we talk about small languages or something like that, even self-driving cars, there are questions, what are our objectives that we want to reach? And this particularly comes up when we talk about the influence of computers on people, which comes up again in the social network construct. I was really intrigued by one of the papers one of my MIT students wrote on these notions of personalized chatbots that have complete knowledge of everything that we do for us, for our benefit. What do we want them to do? Do we want them to be, yes, this is right, Alfred, it's what you should do, and be very nice to us? Do we want them to challenge us all the time? Do they want us to change our political points of view? This came up when I was head of research at Google. It was clear we could make modifiable objective functions for YouTube recommendations so that parents could influence what their children saw. But of course, that would lead to great societal disparity, because people in certain areas with certain religious views, or in countries with dictators or something like that, it would great disparity. Similar things exist when we look at education. What are we trying to do in admissions at Bronx Science, where we have one set of policies in a very liberal city, versus, say, Boston Latin, where we have a different set of policies? I hearken back, and I'll stop soon, I promise. I hearken back to what Stephanie Dix said in her first talk, and that is all of the data, all of the algorithms just highlight that we as humans don't really agree on what we're going to be thinking about. I think that's the ultimate challenge that we have.
I think this is kind of, it's something that comes up in ethics as well. If we all can't agree as humans, how are we going to add AI to the mix? And I know you want to speak to that, Michael.
Yeah, I don't think we can agree, and that's part of being a human being. And so there may be some absolute standards, but even them often very contextual. What I want to do is empower individual people. I don't want the Googles of the world and the Sam Altmans to take over. You know, back when they provided a search engine, I was happy with Google. I'm no longer happy with Google. I think they're pulling all of our knowledge and all of our culture, and they're monetizing it. All right? I don't want them to make decisions about privacy. I want to have a decision. I want to be empowered. And so privacy should be a trade-off. It should be something I possess, and it's my own economic decision. So, you know, if you're going to give me a better deal because I'm an old man, I want you to know that I'm an old man. I get to decide that, though. Or student discounts, or, you know, all the kind of things that happen in a real-world economy. You get to bet you're empowered to make the decision. You turn differential privacy knobs, but it's not someone else who decides how to set that knob. It's you that decides in the context of a particular problem. You want my genome, my medical data? I'm not going to give it to you if you just ask, or I'm not going to give it to Google. But if you're a doctor working on a disease that runs in my family, I'm going to give it to you. So I'm going to change my knob according to all the contextual factors that come into my momentary decision. There's no way a big company can know about my momentary context and my decision and my desire and my utility functions. So it's all about how humans have interacted throughout history. We don't agree about the utilities. We have Pareto frontiers. We have ways of interacting nonetheless that are not always perfect. And our systems have got to integrate into that fabric. They don't get to decide, and they're not going to let others decide for us. I think we often just have this, you know, it's the computer scientists or the government. You know, they're going to, who's going to decide? No, it's each individual, and I want them to have a transparent relationship with technology. And we've moved away from that. I think it used to be more of that. You know, Wikipedia was, so Wikipedia is a good example. No one, you know, you can have an article about Muhammad, and it's good if you go read it. And a lot of people have contributed to it from different perspectives. It kind of came out pretty good, I think. And there is a way that humans can come to kind of Pareto frontiers on things. And so you got to bring the humans into the loop on all of these things, including your individual doctor decisions, including how much data to reveal, all that. So I want to empower humans. I don't want AI to take over.
My question is surrounding the trust of AI systems. So as we are already seeing that many of these bigger foundational models are harder and harder, more resource intensive to train by individual entities, right? So we have to place some trust on these organizations who have the resources to train some of these models. So what are your opinions on how public trust should be navigated around these models being trained by inherently self-interested organizations who are going to be using these models hopefully to, like, presumably to propagate their own interests? How does public trust revolve around that?
Inherently self-interested, I'll be quite quick, but that's not a bad thing, right? That's every one of us is inherently self-interested. That's not necessarily bad. It's whether or not other people can do it. And I think that's actually, we're in an ecosystem where that's going to be possible. These are not that complicated algorithms, right? Anybody can, we're seeing in France that one of the world's best LLMs is now in France. There's one in the UAE. All right, so I'd be not so hysterical about thinking that the companies have all the data and they're going to have all the power and they're going to take over. Really, these LLMs are going to be in verticals. You're going to have a medical one, which is different from this, and you know, so I would not be so worried about that per se. I think it's more that they're getting all the data from everybody and stealing it, and I want an economic model where that doesn't happen.
I'm going to push back on that because I think that it's fine to be self-interested if you're just trying to expand innovation. There's some innovation, you're going to commercialize it, you're going to make a ton of money, it's a great thing. It's an entirely different thing when that innovation, that product becomes critical infrastructure. We expect different things from critical infrastructure. We expect them to protect people. We expect them to be resilient. We expect when they mess up, they're not going to kill you. It's not going to be catastrophic. And a lot of the things in cyberspace have now moved into critical infrastructure. We can't function without them. They're essential. Well, what happens to those private interests then? They're fine. That's how we got here. But they can't lead. And we have to be thinking about the public, and that has to be factored in.
Well, we have to have regulations. Oh, but think about the search engine. The search engine, it's critical infrastructure for all of our lives, for everything. Is search
now.
engines?
Yeah.
Well, no, it was in 1995. I mean, it's changed all of our lives for the best. I mean, our knowledge expands at the keystroke. And it didn't need to be regulated on. Now it's more because of all the nonsense that's there. But it's not that there's been a bad economic model per se.
Go for it.
You mentioned economics. I mean, one of the failures here is what is called antitrust. So if you come to social media, right now we have a bundling of all of the elements from the server all the way through to the user interface. You could actually legally require unbundling so that the curation function is a competitive activity, not run by the same few companies. And that if we had competition, and yes, then Michael could actually pick, who's my curator? And then you actually could have a virtuous circle, which markets, if they are set up right, can achieve and reflect different values and different purposes. But right now, we don't have that. We have a kind of total failure of monitoring the concentration of economic power.
It's all advertising based. So I mean, OpenAI got their money, but Anthropic now came along, and the one in Mistral in France and all that. There is competition for that, but there's not competition for Facebook and buying Instagram, buying blah blah blah. And it's because they made all this money off of advertising, and they made a vast amount of money on that. So it's a broken economic model. It's not just that economics is bad.
Yeah.
And you have to regulate. So I would break up Facebook. I wouldn't necessarily break up Amazon because I think it brings packages to people's doors, and that's actually a service.
It's
but
essential.
I would break up, Amazon. Facebook in a heartbeat.
Sabina, did you want to do it? And we'll queue up another
Yeah, I mean,
question here.
just to add that I think at the same time, I mean, all of this really relevant, but I don't think we should be building AI systems that are predicated on eventually reaching some sort of social equity situation or having a homogeneous society. Neither of those things are going to happen. I mean, diversity is part of human culture, thank goodness. I mean, we really want to foster that. And social inequities will always exist. Power differential will continue to exist. And so arguably, AI systems should be built in a way that actually addresses that to start with. So built with issues of inequity and diversity very much at the core. And I don't think this is happening. Now we're going exactly the opposite direction. We're just seconding existing power differentials in a way that has basically no affirmative elements whatsoever in it. And we are working towards the idea of consensus and homogeneity, which really is not helping us to bring in questions of dissent, which are so important in society generally.
Critical infrastructure is often managed and regulated as a utility, which is another way of thinking about some of these issues.
From what I understand is LLMs are not the ones that are going to lead us to the AGI, but could be a part of the chain that could cater to the AGI. How far? So what if there is a breakthrough in quantum computing how far would it change the playground of the AGI and or
AGI is nonsense, fellow. We aren't AGI. We all have very narrow kinds of intelligences. Aspiring for taking me out and putting in an AGI, I don't know how that would make the world better in any way. Also remember these markets, these planetary scale systems that deliver things for people are intelligent. It's a different kind of intelligence. Is that an AGI? We should aspire to making them better, more accessible, more fair, more all that. Build those things, and they will be more intelligent by any definition. They will allocate resources better. They will allow you to have more control. Those are the things to aspire to. Aspiring to taking out a human and putting in a computer that somehow is this magical thing called AGI. And just let me say, that's not going to happen in the near future. These are predicting the next word in a string of tokens.
Yeah.
Right? They're not building models of things. They're not doing uncertain reason. They're not doing causal inference. They're not doing all the things that we do fluently. And so already getting up to our level on all the things that we care about the most, human creativity, human interaction, human diversity, human experience, they're very, very far away.
And they
they're
don't
shockingly
feel.
good at predicting the next, at certain things, but very,
And they
but
don't
very limited.
feel. If you think about computers don't know what it's like to fall in love or to be disappointed or to be
They
sad.
pretend to.
And they pretend to, but if you think about how that really impacts your responses to just about anything, you're not just a brain, you're a heart, you're a set of emotions. So AGI is, it's hard to imagine that that's true. There's a woman 2 rows behind you, and we want to make sure she gets to ask a question too.
Hello. So I'm currently a student in design. So I definitely think I've chosen the wrong major. I have a love-hate relationship with AI. So the question I have for you is like one of the previous speakers mentioned how like historically AI actually came up to be because we wanted to decentralize the power from like monarchy to for more democracy. So do you think right now we have strayed away from those original values as to why we first came up with these AI systems, and mainly in this day and age where only certain corporations have access to all of this data? So is it perpetuating the already existing power imbalance in the society? So I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Martha, I think you've written a lot about that, haven't you? Yes.
Well, there is path dependence in what has happened so far, but that doesn't mean that's what has to happen in the future. So that's the short answer that I'd have.
Sabina.
Maybe just a good example is think about the food system, right? It's an incredibly complex system that we have now, not just the market for it, but just the way in which food is produced, the way in which we're cultivating seed, in which is distributing across the world, and put together in all sorts of different ways. You would think impossible to trace all this stuff, impossible, it's just too distributed, there's too many people involved. And we're doing this, right? And it's been regulated in particular ways. We can track provenance. It's extremely complex, but we've achieved it. So I don't actually see in principle's reason why this shouldn't be happening for AI, precisely in the ways we've been discussing. I mean, I absolutely agree with you that at the moment, what this technology is doing, and is very much path dependent, is expanding existing disparities in a way that's actually difficult to even contemplate. But this can be shifted in a variety of ways. And of course, that takes a lot of different parts of society to actually get to that. But I think it's feasible.
The phrase AI came from John McCarthy, who was working down the road here. And he was sort of a philosopher, computer scientist. What would it mean to put thought in a computer? So it's a fantastically interesting question, and it's inspired generations. It hadn't happened. But now we move into a more engineering era where things are really impacting the real world. Just that kind of philosophy is not enough. You really got to think from the very beginning about what's the impact on people, what happens when it gets scaled, who owns it. All those issues have to be thought about. And McCarthy's vision is just absolutely inadequate to that task.